What's up, YouTube? Welcome to my channel. And in this particular video, I'm going to be reading a horary chart that I casted to answer the question of where are my keys. And so I normally don't misplace my keys, but this was to one of my older vehicles, and I'm actually getting ready to sell it. And so I forgot where I placed the keys. And so I thought that this would be an excellent time to catch the horary chart. And this is something a bit different from what I normally do on my channel. Most of my content is focused around natal astrology. That's because that's how I learned astrology. And I'm pretty sure that's how a lot of you all learned astrology as well. It's through natal astrology. But actually, and there was a time in within the framework of astrology where horary was the more popular or mostly used type of astrology. Now, horary is derived from the word hour, and it deals with casting a chart for the hour to answer a question. And one of the fascinating things is that, like, yes, you can use astrology to find missing objects or missing people, lost things. And that is something that I don't think a lot of people realize because astrology goes much deeper than just, your moon being in Cancer and you being emotional, or my moon being in Aries and me being hot headed, right? So, without further ado, let's get started. So, the first thing I want to do is talk about the planets, and for 9 to 7 traditional classical planets. And the main thing to note is that the planets are what make things happen. So they are the movers and shakers within the chart. Nothing in the chart is worth anything or even exists if it isn't for a planet that's going to manifest that particular thing. And so I just want to go through some of the basic significations of the planets, but mainly within the context for this video, I want to talk about the planets as location. Okay. So the sun, being the powerhouse of the universe, is the planet that will represent the main room or area within the house. And it can also represent an area where the owner of the house spends the most time. And again, that goes back to the sun being the powerhouse and being the one, the most visible or the brightest star in our solar system. And along with that, the sun represents gold, diamonds, fame, authority. It represents light and royalty and fathers and rich furnishings and valuable items and public displays. And it also represents men, and it can also pertain to God. And it's interesting because in astrology, the sun would be God and the moon would be the goddess. So just keep that in mind when we talk about that when I get to the moon. And in terms of color, the sun is like he represents the colors like that golden type of color, but also yellow, orange, bright and fiery colors are represented by the sun. And it can represent like a source of heat, but also um the sun can represent light. So one of the things that I'm going to mention is combustion. And that is something that is very important because when a planet gets close to the sun, like within 15 degrees, it is said to be under the beams. And then once it gets under 8 degrees, it is said to be in, combustion. And then once it's within like 5 degrees, it's in deep, deep combustion. And so the planet becomes invisible where you can't see it with the naked eye. And the planet actually becomes overwhelmed and dried out. And just think about like if you've ever been in the blazing hot sun, how overwhelming and debilitating that can be. The sun is excessively hot. And so taking on the significations of the sun blinding something or causing it to be invisible, if you cast a horary chart for a missing object or person, and the significator for that person or object is under combustion of the sun, it can represent where that thing is hidden or it's invisible or it's under something. And in the case of a missing person, it can represent where, that person may be under the control of a very dominant person. Um, and so that deals with the sun. The moon is like how the sun is God, the moon would be goddess. And the moon represents things that are silver, pearls, and she has like that creamy white and silver, very pale color to her. But she also represents the quadrant within the chart. So once I pull the chart, the moon, you'll see that the moon will always represent a main thing in the chart. So it is the co-ruler for the person in the chart and also the thing being asked about. So the moon is extremely important. And note that the moon is the fastest moving body. She's the satellite. And so she will play a role within every horary chart. So if you're gonna find, let's say you lost something, and if you're gonna find it, it's gonna be dealing with the moon. Um, the moon also represents mothers, women, the public, travel because she moves very fast, but also liquids and watery places. And so, if you lost something and the significator is by the moon, it can deal with where the item is near a body of water or in a place with liquid. The moon also represents mirrors and things that reflect because that's basically what the moon is a reflector. And so reflective surfaces, mirrors, even glassware and silverware, because again, her color is silver. And then Mercury is the planet that represents all letters. And so Mercury represents anything that is written down, any form of communication, such as an email, anything used for calculations or measurements, books, phones, coins, paper, money, documents, travel. It also, yeah, represents travel like the moon because moon and Mercury are the convertible planets, and these are the fastest moving bodies within the zodiac. And so they represent short distance travel. Mercury also represents business, commerce, math, astrologers, doctors, lawyers, young people. And so if the significator has anything to do with Mercury and it's dealing with a lost object, it could mean that the object is with a young person or it's with some letters. And then we have Mars. And Mars is going to bring us to this whole topic of benefic and malefic within astrology. And Mars is a malefic planet. And so, in some cases, Mars can deal with the destruction or violence and where something can become severed or separated from you. So, Mars is a planet that you have to keep your eye on when it comes to horary charts because if Mars is coming up, it doesn't always deal with like you not being able to find it, but it can if it's negatively aspect, if it's in like an evil aspect with the significator or the ascendant, that's a problem. But Mars, just like the sun, is a hot and dry planet, and so if you lost something, the item in the physics signified by Mars, it could be in an area of the house dealing with fires, such as the stove, a heater, by a light, or anywhere that deals with iron, because Mars is iron. Mars also represents brothers, soldiers, athletes, weapons, knives, steel, sharp instrument, and combustion. And so, well, not combustion like dealing with the sun, but it can deal with combustible things like an engine. So, let's say you got like you work on cars and you have an engine, like and you just have some like an engine or something laying around your garage, and you lost your phone, and Mars comes up, and some other things comes up. That could let you know the phone might be by an engine. It may be by something that is combustible. Now, Venus is the opposite planet of Mars, and where Mars represents war and violence, Venus represents things that are beautiful, delicate, soft, so it can show copper, adornments. It also represents women, especially young women, music, pleasure, sex, fragrance, jewelry, lovely things. Um, it can deal with, yeah, Venus can deal with sex, anything like that. And so that's going to come up in my horary chart that I'm going to show Venus because she ended up being the main significator for my keys or being yeah the main significator for my keys. And then we have Jupiter. And so Jupiter, with the exception of the sun, is the largest planet in our solar system. And so Jupiter is very much so connected with things that expand our consciousness, like universities, libraries, churches, monasteries, courthouse, religious matters. And Jupiter, being a benefic planet, represents release from bondage, aid, gurus, and things made of fine wood. And then we have Saturn, and Saturn is a malefic, just like Mars. And so we have to be weary when we see Saturn doing certain things in in a horary chart. But Saturn being the opposite planet, Saturn is the planet that is furthest away from the sun and the moon. And so while the sun and the moon signify royalty, light, illumination, Saturn signifies anti-forces like Satan, but he also represents coldness and darkness. He's an excessively cold and dry planet. And so Saturn represents things that are heavy, hindered, covered, old. It can represent like lead, forgetfulness, restriction, elderly people, again, old things, imprisonment, misery, decay, horrid smells, leather, skin, bones, agriculture, soil. So if Saturn, let's say Saturn is conjunct the horary ascendant, and let's say he's in bad shape, like he's retrograde in the sign of his detriment or fall, this will suggest that the matter will not end well, and often misfortune intervenes to render the original question not even, relevant. So Saturn, again, is a planet you have to keep your eye on. But it all goes back to dignity, which is, if you've been following my channel, I speak a lot about the essential dignity of planets. And so Saturn in his own signs like Libra, Aquarius, Capricorn, um, it's not the same as Saturn in Aries or Cancer or Leo, because in those signs he's going to be more challenged and be more malefic. So keep that in mind. And then I'll just go ahead and mention Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Uranus represents modern gadgets, technology, eccentric people, also astrology, sudden change. And so Uranus could show where the missing object may be near like a computer or a phone. So similar to Mercury. And Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. But Uranus also represents airplanes and aircraft and air travel. So, and then Neptune represents things that dissolve. So Neptune is a very elusive planet. And so he can, well, the planet, I don't think Neptune is a he. But Neptune can represent chemicals, smoke, fog, medicine, drugs, anything that alters your state, things made of glass, scams, drownings, idealization, absent-mindedness. So a lot of times if you lose something and you weren't paying attention, Neptune is going to show up prominently because it can deal with like inattention. And then Pluto is the planet that is considered to be the higher octave of Mars. And so Pluto can represent powers beyond your control, insurance, extreme measures, life-changing events. In some cases, Pluto, if the missing object is involved, let's say the significator for the object is closely aspected with Pluto, it can show where the object was maybe thrown in the trash or in the process of being discarded, because Pluto is the lord of the underworld, and so he represents like elimination and trash and things that are going to be discarded. And then the 12 houses. The 12 houses also represent places as well. The first house is always, always, always going to represent the person asking the question as well as the question itself. And so if you are a practicing astrologer and a querent comes to you, they're always going to be represented by the first house. And that's the house of life, body, and spirit. And one thing to note is that the first house, the 10th house, the 7th house, and the 4th house are all angular houses. And so if the significator for the missing object is in an angular house, it's a high chance that the object is like in your home, and I'll expand upon that once I get to each house. But that's a good sign because those are the pivotal points in the house, and they're very strong. And then followed by succeeding houses, like if it's in the second, fifth, eighth, or not really the eighth, but I would say the second, fifth, and the 11th. It can show where the object may not be in your home, but it's not far away. So it may be like in your garden or outside in the yard or something like that. But the first house will represent, in terms of location, the area where the person spends the most time. So it can represent where the object may be on their body. And if they lost something, the object is probably somewhere that they frequent very often. It's nearby, and it could be in an entryway or with multicolored items because Mercury is the planet that is the significator for the first house. And then the second house is very important in missing objects because the second house represents our movable possessions. And so we will always look at the second house when it comes to like if you lose something. And the second house deals with the things that support a life. And so it could show where if the significator is in the second house, it could be with maybe jewelry or valuables, things that we value in a safe place, a place where you typically keep money, and it could be with greenish items or things related to the throat or neck. And it could be a place that you overlook because normally the second house is a place where you would normally keep it. And so you may have overlooked that item. And then the third house deals with brothers, siblings, relatives, short trips, change of location, vehicles, letters, paperwork, rumors, and documents. And we notice that the moon has her joy in this house. And so the third house is a cadent house. And so when we find the significant in the third house, that can be problematic because it can show where the missing item may have changed the locations and not be where it should be. And so, well, again, the cadent houses, they fall away from the angles, and so they are associated with movement and change. On the other hand, though, it can deal with where the item may be with a brother, with a sister, with a relative, and or it could be in your car or in your vehicle. And then we have the fourth house. And so the fourth house is known as the subterranean angle because it deals with things that are below the earth. And so it represents real estate and graves and buildings and property. But it also represents our parents, our fathers, elderly things, ancestors, ancestry, and it's based on hidden treasure. Again, dealing with the subterranean nature of this house. One important thing to know about the fourth house is that it deals with old or ancient things. It deals with like things that are old. So if the significator is in the fourth house, it can deal with where the atom may be with an elderly person or in the oldest part of the house or with something ancient. The fourth house also represents the immovable goods. So again, like your house, like, but also cities, and it represents the end of matters. And so in other horary charts, it can show if the significator ends up in the fourth house, it can show what something can be coming to an end or in its final stages. And then we have the fifth house, which is the joy of Venus. And so a lot of the things I said about Venus are going to apply to the fifth house because it is the house of love, courtship, affairs, fun, recreation, children, places used for entertainment. It could be a child's room. Let's say you have children and you lost your ring or something. It could, and the significator is in the fifth house, and may show where the ring may be in your child's room. And it can also represent the object being with things of beauty or where your parent keeps their valuables as well, because the fifth house is the second house from the fourth house. And so that is a technique known as derivative houses. And so the second house, so your second house is representing your money. And then when you get to the parents, your fifth house is their second house. So it could represent their valuables. And so keep that in mind. And then we have the house of bad fortune, where Mars, the malefic planet, rejoices. And the sixth house is the house of sickness, infirmities, enemy. And in terms of locations, it can represent being in a sick room, in a place related to medicine, or where or it could be like with an employee. And because it is a cadent house that is falling away from an angle, it can show where the missing item could be like in a state of transition, or it could have moved from one place to another. So, and the sixth house does not form a natural aspect with the ascendant. So it is in aversion to the ascendant, meaning it is blinded. So it can show where the object may be beneath something that blocks the view, or the missing item may be in a location other than where you think it should be. And so, if the significator falls in the sixth house, don't even waste your time looking for it and when you think it should be. And then we have the seventh house, which is the setting angle. And this is the house that can deal with sunset, nightfalls, marriage, a spouse, business partners, lovers, the other party within a contract, but also your open enemies. And in terms of locations, it can show where the object may be with a person, with another person that is close to you, or with a partner, or where a partner spends a lot of their time, or in the part of the house opposite to where it is usually kept, because the seventh house is opposite of the ascendant. So there's the oppositional theme. And it can be kept with something dark or black. And then the eighth house is known as the idle house, because just like the sixth house, it does not form a natural aspect with the ascendant. So it is invisible to the ascendant. And so it can deal with places in terms of location. The eighth house can deal with things that lie obscurely, a location that's protected and hidden away from view. Um, Idle places that are visited infrequently. So if there's an area in your house, like your basement, or maybe a certain room that you rarely go to, that would be the eighth house. The eighth house is also like the bathroom as well. And it could also be in the home of your of the person's child. And in some cases, the eighth house can show where the item may be in the garbage or in the trash or disposed of. And then the ninth house is the house where the sun rejoices. And so this is a house where it's going to show an area that is very well lit, such as like maybe a book room or book reading room, but it can also just deal with anything that deals with knowledge and learning. And so a church, university, a location that is abroad, a well lit location. It could be with a university student. It could be near the significant. It could be near a source of heat, even. And then the 10th house. And so notice the ninth house is a cadent house, but it doesn't take on some of the negative significations that the sixth house and the eighth house does, because it is connected to the ascendant through a superior trine. And so it is connected with the ascendant. And because the sun rejoices here, it adds that level of visibility and recognition to the ninth house. But it is still a cadent house nonetheless. And then we have the 10th house, which is the culminating angle. So it is the house opposite of the subterranean fourth house. And so where the fourth house deals with things that are hidden and not very visible, the 10th house deals with things that are public. And so in terms of location, it could deal with a very visible or highly visited area within a location or in your house. The most visited place is a very public place. So it can represent your job even. You may have left, if the significator is involved with the 10th house, you may have lost the item at your job, which is basically your home away from home for a lot of people, or in a lot of cases. Um, it could be with the mother, because the 10th house is associated with the mother, or a place used by her. It could also be in an area where your spouse may hide things or bury treasure. So it could be near also maybe something that is red or pink. So now that we got the preliminary stuff out the way, this is the chart that was cast to find my missing car keys. So it was on January 6th, 2023. at 3:50 a.m. Yeah, I was up early in the morning stressing. And it was during a moon hour, a Venus day. And so notice that Mercury is the ruler of this chart because Virgo is rising. And Mercury deals with car keys, communication, um, things like this. So it is very much so appropriate that Mercury is the chart ruler because Mercury represents keys. And then we see that Mercury is retrograde. And while retrograde planets are not very, have their own issues within, like the natal chart or whatever, or an electional chart, in a horary chart, if the significator is retrograde, it can show where the item is moving back to you and where it will be discovered soon. And so when I saw that, it gave me some relief because I'm like, yeah, okay, I know the item is going to come back to me. I know the keys are going to, I know I'm going to get them back relatively soon. And Mercury is in the sign Capricorn. And I didn't get into the sign significations in this video because I didn't want it to be too long. But Capricorn is an earth sign, so we can deal with where things are where it's like either low or on the ground, things that are brown or black, things that are swarthy. And it can also represent like things that are older or being with something older. Excuse me. And then we see that Mercury is being combusted here by this sun. And so this sun is like drying this Mercury out. So with that bit of information, I knew that the missing item was hidden, obviously, away from view. And it was underneath or beneath something. Something was overshadowing it. And so it wasn't going to be in plain sight. Capricorn also deals with like old wood and stuff like that. And then with this being in the fourth house, remember I said the fourth house can deal with the oldest room in the house or it being with the oldest person in the house. And the fourth house is angular, so we know that it is within the home. And so another thing we want to look at is in this chart, we have Venus that is ruling, that is on the second house cusp. I'm sorry, we have Taurus, we have Libra on the second house cusp, and Venus is ruling this second house and it's in the fifth house. And the reason we look at the second house is again, the second house deals with our movable assets. And so with it being in the fifth house represents well, first, let's talk about Libra and Aquarius. Those are both air signs, and air signs deal with things that are either up high, above the waist, um, and it can show where something may be at our level. So we contrast that with earth signs, which can deal with where things may be down low or grounded, and with the air signs, they may be up high. So just keep that in mind, because that's going to come into the answer. And then Venus is in the fifth house, and the fifth house represents like display, um, like fragrance, beauty, cologne, perfume, and it can deal with like beautiful items. It being in a large, it being in an area where it is a lot of traffic, if you know what I mean. So the fifth house is a very public house, and so that can show where, okay, if I start combining these significations, I see that the item is in the oldest part of the house, or it could be with an older person, and it is hidden away from view. And with the ruler of the second being Venus, I know it could be with things that are beautiful, like again, perfume, maybe some delicacies, maybe um something that is embroidered, like embroidery or whatever. And with it being in the fifth house, I know that it could be near something used for entertainment. And in the house, that could be like, the entertainment system that, you have in your house. And so I'm thinking as I was looking at this chart. And then I looked at the moon. The moon is the co-significator for the querent or the person asking the question, which in this case would be me. And it is also the significator for the keys itself. And so the moon is in Cancer in her own sign, and she's in the 10th house. So she's in the angular house as well. So again, I'm like, okay, I know I'm gonna find it. And the 10th house deals with the mother, and the moon also represents mothers and women, and it is forming an opposition to the Mercury and the sun. So this is the full moon chart, and the moon is angular. And then I wanted to look at the ruler of the fourth house to get a better understanding of again where the item might be. And here we see that Sagittarius is on the fourth house with Jupiter ruling this house in the seventh house. And so this would show where the keys are not with the chart hold with the Aquarian, they're with somebody else, they're with another party that lives within the house. And so when you take all of that to get into consideration, I ended up finding the keys on the next day at like 2:30 p.m. What happened was they were in their usual spot, and they were in an area that I had overlooked. And it was in my grandmother's room and in a dresser. And on that dresser, she has all of her perfumery and other just like, very Venusian type things on the dresser. And when I asked her where they were, she said they were in the area where it always was, but it was hidden beneath something. And so, with her discovering the keys, that is dealing with this moon opposition right here, the moon being strong and upholding these planets. And it also shows with her being, the oldest person in the house, the fourth house dealing with being with an elderly person. And then with Mercury retrograde, I found it relatively fast. And the ruler of the fourth and the seventh, it being in an environment of another person. And so I just thought that was very interesting how um I was literally like taking notes on this chart trying to, decode it when she came and said, "Hey, I found the keys." And I'm like, "What?" And the funny thing is, I low key wish I would have been able to find them without her like finding them to kind of test this out. But I was in the process of pulling a chart when she found them, and will attribute that to this moon in Cancer being so strong and the fact that it is opposing the significator, which could show where um, maybe the person that found or discovered the item is signified by the opposing planet. Not saying that's definitely always the case, but it's something that I will definitely keep in mind. And so I hope you all find this video insightful. Again, I know it's a little different from what I normally do, but I wanted to mix things up and stop talking about natal astrology all the time. But I will be back with more natal astrology videos. Stay tuned for my 10th house video. That video will be coming up very shortly. And if you would like an email, not, if you would like a reading, send me an email at yrashawn37@gmail.com. And it could be a natal reading, a horary reading, or a predictive reading. And and I'll just send you a list of the services that I offer. And I do have a website coming soon, so stay tuned for that video. And again, like this video if you like this video, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and thank you for watching.